Well, thank you for your patience, sort of hanging here right till the end. I'll try and keep this quick, and in fact, I've got to apologise because our Chief Medical Officer, who normally does the middle part of this presentation, couldn't make it today, and I'm always telling him to hurry up so I can move really quickly through that part of it. Okay, just a quick introduction. Our mission is to become a leading diabetes and dermatology drug company, starting with activated protein C. We have excellent phase 1 data, clinical data in chronic wound healing. BTX 101 is the drug code we've given it. It was discovered, we have discovered and documented mechanisms of action. There's 7 mechanisms of action, and there's 23 published papers around the scientific work that's been done on it. We're moving into phase 2 trials in diabetic ulceration, and Steve, this doesn't look like the slide deck. Never mind, we'll just work through it. We're going to phase 2 trials in diabetic ulceration. We've got a National Health and Medical Research grant to part fund that. We have an existing patent portfolio and a number of recent filings. And we're going into 2 phase 2As also in BTX 101 later this year. We have a provisional which is actually lodged in BTX 102, which is animal APC, and BTX 103 is in very early stage. It's a small molecule drug. So we have a very low cost, low risk drug, what's called a drug reprofiling model, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. A strong management team with expertise in all areas of drug commercialization, and an outstanding scientific advisory board. This is quite an interesting slide in that it shows that if you have reprofiled a drug with a known toxicity, you can effectively go straight into phase 2. So reducing the time to market from 15 years down to 5 years. It does have a known toxicity. The recombinant version of APC was developed by Lilly, and I'll talk about Lilly in a sec because we're actually in negotiations with them at the moment. The wound care market, it's a big market. You see all sorts of different stats. We think in diabetic ulceration alone, it's about 1.5 billion. The other two phase 2As we're going into are each at around 2.5 billion. So our markets are large. And certainly in diabetic ulceration, it's pretty much what's called an unmet medical need. The standard of care and so on there is, it's a real problem. It generally ends up with amputations, high hospital costs, etc. Okay, so the mechanisms of action, as I say, this is normally Greg's bit. There are in fact 7 mechanisms of action with activated protein C. It is a naturally occurring protein in the body. We've recently published a paper which shows that in diabetes, particularly diabetes 2, that the APC levels are very depressed, and that's in fact why we're seeing such incredible results in APC and diabetic ulceration. That in fact is the 7 mechanisms of action where they've published papers, our scientific advisory group and chief scientific officer. So it's pretty exciting science. I mean, everybody who's looked at this just goes, this is pretty exciting science. There are the papers that have been published. If anyone. And the phase 1 study, we did a small randomized double-blind placebo-controlled pilot study with 12 patients, and there were single case studies on another 37 patients. I think the really compelling thing down is the bullet point at the bottom, where we talk 19 of 21 diabetic ulcer patients had marked improvement or complete wound healing over the period of time. So I'm going to show you some pretty gross photos, so if anyone wants to close your eyes. So this is one of the 47 patients. This was on day 1. You can see the size of the wound. It's pretty deep as well, as you can see. Day 7, day 10, day 19, and day 28. This patient had this wound for over 3 years. So the second study, again, this guy had this problem for around about 5 years. So with APC, the interesting thing there, by 90 days, it was basically healed. And in a follow-up session, this was all done at the Royal North Shore Hospital, in a follow-up session, it was basically improved 14 months later. So a common question that's asked in this is, are you solving the problem now? But what happens, in the follow-up trials? It's also one of the reasons our phase 2 trial is 2 years, so that we've got an adequate follow-up period. This is our current portfolio. The 2 recent ones that we've lodged are in animal wound healing with animal APC. And we've got initial studies that were done out at Sydney University at their Camden Vet facility, and a broad inflammatory skin disorders in APC. And we're in the process of restoration of a US patent in diabetic ulcers. Again, it'll make a little more sense in the context of this slide. So Lilly, Eli Lilly, for those of you who don't know, they're about a $45 billion market cap pharmaceutical company. They developed recombinant APC for the treatment of sepsis. You don't want to get sepsis. It's basically a blood infection, and it's pretty dramatic, and a lot of people die who get it. In 2011, they withdrew Xigris from the market. There are announcements on that, and they're going to be publishing papers on what's called the PROAS shock study, which basically said that it really didn't do that much. So a lot of money. They probably spent $300-400 million developing it. So we're now in negotiations with Lilly. They're aware of all the science, and to secure all their patents and IP relating to dermatological indications, secure a supply of APC, their cell line and manufacturing technology. Normally these things are contract manufactured. Lonza's one of the largest in the world, if not the largest. They were the previous manufacturer, and we've already basically got an MOU with Lonza. And also we're in the process of discussing cross-licensing opportunities with Lilly. Phase 2 trial in diabetic ulcers. We're just finalising, a contract with Quintiles, which is one of the largest contract research organisations in the world. Supply of APC relates to Lilly. We're preparing what's called an FDA IND for a pre-meeting with the FDA, probably in a couple of months, but that whole process is about 21 weeks. Then we get into the phase 2 trial, and we're already in discussions with 4 pharma potential partners. So these are the 2 phase 2As that I alluded to. I can't actually tell you what they're in, but they're in dermatological, in the area of dermatology. We've already got TGA and Ethics Committee approval, and that'll be done at the Royal North Shore Hospital, similar to what the study in the phase 1 study and small trial in diabetic ulceration. We'll be using injection, which was what again was done with diabetic ulcer, and then in the phase 2B we'll be using a gel or dressing compounds, so we'll be able to look at to test the comparative data. Again, Quintiles will be the CRO for this. Equine wound healing. We've actually are working with a group to produce equine APC from blood plasma. We don't want to go through the brain damage of trying to develop recombinant APC in animals or animal APC. It's a hell of a lot cheaper than trying to do that. It's extracting human blood plasma. APC from human blood plasma. We actually have started delivery studies in both gel and dressing technologies. It'll be a 6-month study, and we are just in the process of preparing the requirements, the registration with the Australian Pesticide Veterinary Medicines Authority. And we actually have a patent on that now. So Steve, this is the kind of presentation before. So, and what we like about this is we can get into the market a lot quicker. And so we're actually talking to Elanco as a subsidiary of Lilly, which is a veterinary products company. So we're talking to them and several others. And as I say, if you think, so I don't want to sort of ramble on, but in particular, racehorses, if they get injuries to their forelocks, it's a real problem. And there is no, again, it's a sort of unmet medical need in racehorses. But we're targeting the whole equine and companion animal market. My background, corporate advisory, this is actually my third biotech. Roger Moore, who was actually head of Novo Nordisk Asia Pac for 30 years. Novo are about I think the 10th or 11th largest biotech in the world, and they've got a very strong diabetes franchise. Greg Fulcher, who, as I mentioned, was supposed to be here today, is a pretty busy guy, as you can see. And what we think is really critical, and based on the experience, certainly with the first, with Nuon Therapeutics, is the linkage between the chief medical officer and the CRO. That has to be absolutely work really, really well. If you're going to be talking to big pharma about partnering, there's no shortcuts. Everything has to be done to a gold standard. And Greg's been principal investigator on 32 clinical trials over the last 5 years. Chris Jackson was actually the inventor. Chris is the director of Sutton Laboratories, and he's been working in APC for the last 10 years. And of those 23 papers, he's an author on every one of those. Mike Selly is working on our early stage small molecule program, and Andrew Sands is our chief medical officer. Everyone is part-time here because the traditional model of VCs investing in phase 2 companies, and they do a Series A, and then they do a Series B, and then they do a Series C, and everyone's so diluted at the end of the day, it's taken so long to get there. We think that model is broken. We think we've got the team in place on a part-time basis to execute on this, and in particular having Quintiles there as the CRO. So we want to spend the money in the studies itself rather than employing a whole bunch of people. Mark Feldman is the head of the Scientific Advisory Board. He's head of the Kennedy Institute of Rheumatology. It's actually in Oxford now. And Andrew Dart is working on the equine studies out at Camden. We're looking at pre-IPO or Series A funding, but that funding will take us through to what we believe are pharma sort of endpoints. We're still in we don't know what the final shape of the Lilly deal will be, so there may be some variation on this, and that's a breakup of the clinical trial. Actually, the trial, the phase 2 is actually a lower number than that. We've been in negotiations again with Quintiles to get that down. If we do an IPO, we're aiming to do it in Q3, Q4 next year, and we hope to have those assets there in a prospectus so that people can see the milestones that we've achieved, and raising something like, 10 to 15 phase 2Bs, finalise the phase 2, etc., etc. So that's the plan. We're a very what's called asset-centric company. There are some biotechs that go out and they might have a portfolio of 3 or 4 or 5 drugs, and the amount of effort that's required to bring any of those to a point where you can do a partner deal with a pharma is a lot. So those sorts of companies need a lot of money. We're very asset-centric around APC, and what we do think is a potential outcome is that when we get our phase 2 and phase 2A data, that one of the farmers that we're talking to already will just say, hey, we'll just take it from here. And frankly, farmers like doing the phase 3s as well. Research institutes, Colling, Royal North Shore, Kennedy Institute, Quintiles I mentioned. Tom Gumley is our patent attorney. He's been fantastic. Corporate lawyers and accountants. Thank you.